Hey everybody, how's it going? I am Gorg from Bozo, and today we're going to be talking about Seekers of the Storm, and all my thoughts on it. Now, about a month ago, I released a video called How to Properly Continue a Franchise, Seekers of the Storm. If you haven't seen that video yet, go ahead and watch it. I'll try to insert it on the video here, and basically that video for me was a hype video, because I was mega excited about this DLC. Now, that video also did really well. I got up to 12,000 views, which is the highest this channel has ever seen, and I got a lot of comments and discussions alongside about 50 subscribers off of that video. So I want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to like and subscribe, and also watch through my entire video and leave fun comments. And if you are here now and you saw the last video, thank you so much, and it is good to have you along for the ride again. Something I want to mention as well is I do apologize for how long it took me to put this video out. This last month for me has been a huge mess of fun stuff going on, and also it's been a good mix of not so fun stuff going on. So all that I ask is that you just bear with me. It has been a long last couple of weeks, and that I will hopefully soon be back to uploading at a normal pace again. So going back on track to the topic of this video, my previous video basically had me praising a lot of stuff that I didn't even at the time know how it was going to play out, as I was just mainly so excited. So in other words, I want this video to be a kind of follow-up from my previous video. On top of this, later on in the video, I want to go through and discuss the different comments that were left, as I believe many of the times I've been wrong in my judgment, but also I think there are still a lot of places where I was right in the discussion. So if you have to comment in the last video, stick around, as you just might be a part of this video today. Seekers of the Storm is now at Risk of Rain 2's second DLC now, coming out on August 27th, 2024, and on top of this, it would now be Gearbox's first time being the ones in charge of releasing this DLC. And with that being said, a lot of people are already worried about the future of this game, as Gearbox on the developing side did not do a very polished or good job at releasing this DLC. It's very buggy, with console players living in a hell, as apparently if you try to connect a controller on the menu of the game for split screen, some people have just nuked their save files. Now, albeit some of these players who did delete their save files were not too upset at this, which just means they get to play more Risk of Rain. But this doesn't just stop there. There have been plenty of other rough bugs, such as people not being able to kill Mithrix, a lot of apparently the other characters having random things that just aren't right, Seeker's new revive mechanic glitching and not working properly, and many more. And the issue is that this game is not being run by an indie studio anymore. So seeing this type of dog shit be brought onto a fan favorite franchise by a larger corporation is even more frustrating to see. I will personally not be talking too much about the bugs, because personally, I have not seen very many. Plus, as long as my shit isn't being system wiped, I am fine with bugs. Sometimes they're just goofy, and I usually don't run into them. But that's not to say that having bugs in a fresh DLC is acceptable. But something I will say is that almost every time a fresh new game gets released, don't be surprised if it is bugged to high hell. Now, I am not defending these companies. I can totally see how using your fan base as guinea pigs for bugs instead of playtesting them before is probably way more cheaper and time effective than doing it yourself. So unfortunately, that is the reality of bugs that I have become sort of aware of. On top of this, bugs aren't temporary. Many people started the game, saw bugs, refunded the game, all in with a week of the DLC being out. Bugs are not temporary and can be fixed. You just have to be patient and see how it all plays out. To insert what I have seen personally, I have only seen 2 bugs, of which one being the weird Seeker's revive mechanic that I am still confused by, but also my favorite bug is if you're playing a chef and you use his rolling ability into sometimes larger enemies, you will get stepped on and launched through the bottom of the map. I find this stupid and funny, but I can see how someone who doesn't care can be put off by the fact that they're getting unwarranted fall damage for something out of their control. Alright, so moving on from the elephant, let's discuss what is actually new to Risk of Rain 2 with this DLC. Seekers of the Storm has brought to the game about 6 new stages, according to the wiki. Apparently, one of the 6 is unknown for now, so I'll say 5 stages, alongside 3 new playable survivors and a brand new boss fight for us to challenge ourselves with. On top of all of this, a lot of these stages are also given night mode variations of each of themselves, which change some of the bits how that map is formed, a heap of new items for us to find and add to our arsenal, and another cool thing that I will say that they added is that once looping, after you've entered your first loop, you will now be able to see a different side of the game, as some of the colossal levels will be added with a mix of the game, even with having a new 5th stage, Hellman's Hatchery, a new artifact that I'll explain later on, and finally 4 new enemies to the game, with 3 of them not being the boss, of course. So if we're going to pick apart this DLC, let's start with our brand new stages. With Seekers of the Storm, we see a new set of levels that we consider as traveling to Colossus. These levels are a set of different levels that you can go from one to the other in a sort of upward climb. In order to get to the Colossus, you must be able to find a green portal, which is usually opened by finding a Halcyon shrine, or usually only what I consider colossal levels. Although you have a small chance to find them on levels that are not a part of the DLC, the shrine will sort of act as a teleporter, but instead of having to charge the teleporter and kill a boss, you will instead have to charge a pillar with gold that you pick up eventually. Once you fill this pillar to a certain amount of gold, you can pray to the shrine, which then spawns in your boss fight, which you will find yourself fighting a Halcyonite, a giant floating gold stone golem who wields a gold sword. I will talk about them more later. Upon killing the Halcyonite, you will be given a sort of drop that will give you the chance to choose between 3 various items to add to your collection, acting sort of like a void potential. These drops are able to go up in different tiers of loot, as tier 1 will see you having 3 options, being able to pick 1, tier 2 will see you having 4 options, being able to pick 2, and tier 3 will see you having 5 options, which I'll assume have you pick 3. But I have not seen this in my game, but items aside of these drops as well can be super effective, as sometimes I found myself being able to pick between 2 random common items, and they just randomly inserted red items, which at times can be really nice to find. I find myself having no clue how these tier progressions work. I'm assuming it has something to do with either a player count or maybe which stage you choose to do a shrine on. After looting, your green portal will now be open, and you will be able to enter it and begin your journey traveling to Colossus. Now, the Colossus is made up of 3 stages, starting off with a reformed altar, eventually making its way to Treeborn Colony, and then finally you're landing yourself at Prime Meridian, the stage where you will face the false sun. On top of this, the DLC also adds at least 1 level, Shattered Abodes, to the base part of the game, as it allows you to have a different stage to enter the Colossus if you're lucky enough. Alternatively, if you cannot find a Halcyonite shrine by luck on your first go, then you can rather go to the hidden bazaar between stages and try to dream it, and if that doesn't work, then you can also try and wait till your second loop, where colossal stages will automatically entered in your game by luck. And finally, with the 5th stage, I haven't talked about yet, on our second loop, you have the ability to run into Helminth Hatchery, which acts as an alternative primordial teleporter stage, giving you the ability to loop or fight Mithrix. So, with mechanics out of the way, I want to talk about these stages individually and how I feel about them. Starting off with Shattered Abodes. I was lucky enough on my first game to get this stage off the bat. Shattered Abodes is kind of a medium-sized map with being not very vertical. The stage acts closer to being a base stage map instead of being a colossal map, giving you an early ability to rather enter the Colossus or just keep going on with the base game if you don't feel like going towards the false sun. On a story-wise aspect, Shattered Abodes, I believe, is the Lumerian Temple, where they built the Shrine of Providence right before he was brought to life and corrupted. The only thing left of his original shrine would be a giant crater full of crystal shards. Now, to give you a very base opinion on what's going to be how I feel about these levels, I genuinely do enjoy the temple looking aspect and kind of mysterious ancient rune styles of a lot of these maps. Shattered Abodes to me captures just a perfect gloomy dark feeling of what would be this event that once made a lively temple for the Lemurians into a desolate wasteland. Stage 1 of the Colossus has us traveling to Reformed Altar, which, in my opinion, is my favorite map of this entire DLC so far. This map is so far the most vertical of the couple Colossal missions, as it has you exploring the different levels of what was an old temple, now just covered in sand left to be dark and gloomy. Yet the walls and dark spaces are illuminated by what is left of the gold arches and platforms. This is one of those maps where, looking at it, it doesn't really feel big until you're tasked with rather traveling to different floors of the map or traveling from one side to the other, where on one end the map has you in this giant open area where you can ascend the steps of this giant temple, whereas the other side has you traveling through a tight packed cave tunnels as they just sprawl in so many random different directions throughout the path of the map. I really do enjoy this map because it almost feels as if on different sides of the map I'm in completely different areas, whereas one part of the map you're on is secluded, it doesn't even feel like you're in the same place. Now, one of the things I do like to mention is that on both the left and right sides of the temple, you can see the roots of trees, which even allow you to climb on top of them and loot stuff that happened on them, or if you want to get some leverage on your enemies, you can jump on top of the temple and fight down below. And I believe that's another thing I do enjoy about this map, is it almost feels like it caters to so many different types of playstyles. For example, if you're a melee character and you want to keep things close to you and confined, go ahead and run through those tunnels, but if you're a sniper like Railgunner, you can just find the highest point of this little open area and just snipe things one by one. and alongside the roots of these spiraling trees, we eventually head up to our next map, Treeborn Colony. This map probably my least favorite map of the DLC, as it's just so short and doesn't really have a lot of difference in its map. I see this map as less of a more fun journey map and a lot more of a challenge map, as this map has you basically challenge yourself in your coordination to travel to different branches of what seems to be the civilization that's kind of in ruins that would once live in these trees. I believe that the civilization that probably belonged to this area is most likely the alloy vultures, as they carry a heavy presence on this map. Though a little theme I do believe that I'll start to see is a lot of these maps cater to low mobility characters. So if you find yourself with a character like Captain that really doesn't move, or maybe even Engineer, you're probably going to have a tougher time even trying to get around these tree maps. Now, one of the things I do think plays in Treeborn Colony being kind of a lackluster map, the fact that they probably wanted to add a more watch where you're going type of vibe to the map, so if it were to be any bigger, it would probably just be a giant hell. And one of the biggest challenges I discovered with this map is the fact that if you're trying to fight the boss, you really don't have any places to retreat, especially if you're a melee character, as the boss is really only one area, as a portal can only spawn on genuine like 3 of the different areas. But upon looking through the clouds and through the brush of the trees of Treeborn Colony, we start to see the temple and what we eventually will find ourselves in Prime Meridian. Now, as of right now, I'll talk about Prime Meridian as I'm treating it as a normal stage, and I want to treat this kind of close to pre-commencement part, where right before you go to Mithrix, but not during the fight. Prime Meridian has you find yourself basically in a dead sprint and an upward climb in order to reach the temple. And as you're running, you're kind of jumping across broken pieces of this temple and alongside different pieces of rock. As all of this is happening, you're basically dodging random enemies who are being spawned in. Although they don't seem to be bigger focus, everywhere you step will be circles of lightning that will be spawned. These circles you must evade, as it is only if a few of them hit you, you're fine, but after a bunch keeps hitting you over and over, you'll start to drastically lose health with these lightning strikes. One thing I do enjoy about Prime Meridian is the moment you do get to the top of this climb, you'll hit a basically man cannon type of thing that will take you to the top of the temple like area where no enemies spawn here, giving you a basically chance to just kind of hang out. Or if you have friends that are slower than you can just look over the edge and watch them get obliterated by lightning. On top of this tower temple area, you'll get to hang out, and you can also kind of look around, as there will be different trading pools where you can try to get better red items, which eventually might even help you for your upcoming fight. Couple things about this area is, one, you can look around at the night sky and watch the awesome lightning bolts of lightning shatter as you start to feel that you're about to face your final challenge. Another cool thing is that if you run to the opposite side of the temple and look down, you could actually see the top of Treeborn Colony, the map you just came from, and this is one of the things I really like about this DLC. This is something I like about old games. I do the same type of thing as being able to kind of see where you're about to go and where you just came from. For example, in Reformed Altar, looking at the trees, you could kind of look up and see the sky. We don't really yet know where you're going, or as once you get to Treeborn Colony, you couldn't look down to the cracks and see the temple you just came from, while being able to look up and see Prime Meridian before you get there. Now, if we're going to talk about my opinion on how I feel that Prime Meridian works, I do want to say that I genuinely think Prime Meridian is kind of a cool, new, fresh way to kind of run it, but if you're a character that doesn't have mobility, you're kind of just straight A fucked, which can be brutal, as most of the time my friends, when we were going to do this boss fight, would die from lightning before they even got to touch the boss fight. Now, also, I have seen that a lot of people don't really like this Prime Meridian part. I kind of do enjoy the more run to the hills type of vibe, instead of the bunker down and fight the charged pillars. It makes it feel as it kind of brings a pace of this journey a little bit more exciting. And I think at this point, with how Risk of Rain is supposed to be, it really genuinely is a hard game, and I do think that once you get to this point, this is your proving grounds, so you should be able to learn how to dodge and how to get your ass up there without dying, because it's kind of how commencement works. You're fighting enemies who are just so much bulkier than you while charging these pillars. You're going to have to be good enough to prove yourself. So for an overall opinion on these stages, I will say I genuinely do really like, and I do have a lot of fun with these stages, and I think they're pretty good. I do wish that there was a little bit more done with Treeborn Colony, as it's kind of lackluster. Other than that, I really do enjoy these other stages, and I think they do bring a fresh light to Risk of Rain and possibilities that they can really explore when it comes to stage design. But one thing that I do really even have to mention is the music for these stages, because oh my god, here's the thing. I thought about to myself is when it comes to a game development team, it's like, oh well, it's buggy and unpolished, but in reality, they only had a year to work on it. But for the amount of stuff that they had in this this DLC, I think a year is nowhere compared to the time that Chris had to write the absolute bangers that he did. Where it's like, in my opinion, if you needed a year to code 16 items, 6 stages, and 3 new survivors, but this guy was able to make this type of art in a year, Gearbox, you're going to have to do a little bit of self-reflecting, and I think that is going to be a little bit of the piece where I will roast Gearbox on this videos, but otherwise, I'll talk about that more later. Now, a couple of these stages have just absolutely fire songs, with others still being pretty good, but just not really on my roster or something I care about too much. For example, even though the Treeborn Colony is kind of a mid-map, the music that plays on this map is so good. The song that plays on the stage, and forgive me if I genuinely butcher this, is Om Mani Padme Hum Part 2, which is a song that reminds me heavily of the boss fight music for Survivors of the Void, where the song does an awesome thing where it can go from a slow guitar to eventually going into an insane jazz piano solo, going straight back to an almost guitar solo. That is just something that kills me when I hear this music, because honestly, I can be terrible at this game, but once the music comes on, I just get immediately so much better. Another song that I really enjoyed from this DLC was the first song on Shatter of Bold, which is I Should Build This Man a Statue. First off, what a fun and genuinely good lore accurate song to what is happening during the stage. And it's kind of a cool way to tell the story of the stage without really telling the story. Not only that, but the vibe of the song is really it's a make it or break it for me. It kind of gives me this not very diverse song, but just this heavy grunge rock song to the kind of start flow of what is going to be an epic journey in what I dare say, Seeking the Storm. Another song I do want to bring to light, and once again, forgive me if I butcher this, but is Talakan. Which is a song that I believe only plays as a boss fight song during a Portal event. Now, I don't know if this was an unpopular opinion beforehand, but genuinely for the previous songs, I wasn't really a big fan for Portal songs. So having this kind of new set of Portal songs for the new maps makes it so that it's almost better for me to listen to. As I wasn't a big fan of how the song that you listen to for the stage gets immediately cut out for the boss fight, but it makes sense. What does it the best for me with this song is it kind of gives me, instead of just feeling like I'm listening straight to electric guitar, it almost gives me a kind of vibes to like how Electric Man Adventures from Geometry Dash, where memes aside, this song almost brings a more, how do I say it, like an 8-bit feeling to a guitar, and this is what I really like. It's just a heavy, deep soundtrack, but it feels like it's from an arcade game. Now, since the DLC is still very fresh and I haven't been able to depict where songs play at some points, one of the songs I do want to say, even though I have no idea what stage it plays on, is Ye no More from the soundtrack, which is just this entire time this very slow and smooth guitar solo. I feel like I just have Frank Zappa playing in my fucking ear while I'm fighting aliens in space. Now with the music and stage aside, I do know that I haven't said anything about the boss fight, but that's just because I want to keep it to myself for a different part of the video, although the music and the stage is just beautiful, but we will get to that later. Now when it boils down to the survivors, we have 3 survivors in this DLC that we get to enjoy, with 2 being unlocked, with 1 being immediately given to a Seeker, as Seeker of the Storm, obviously. Now when it comes down to these 3 characters, I will say I absolutely love all these characters. Now Seeker off the bat to me, when I first saw her reveal, I wasn't very interested, and I was a little bummed out by what Seeker looked like, as I expected a more space looking kind of character, similar to the others. But I guess when it comes down to the map design and the kind of adventure she's going on, she fits very well into it, as she gives me a kind of magic monk vibe, almost close to what a lot of Avatar characters look like to me. Seeker's main ability is just a normal orb attack similar to Artificer's, but without having to charge them back up, and these attacks are very low damage, but on your 3rd attack you do a higher damage attack. Seeker's second ability, which I think is pretty busted, is anywhere on the map that you highlight, you get to shoot a fish straight up out of the ground that'll hit an enemy on the way out, and while it doesn't do crazy amount of damage, once pairing it with a backup mag, you could shoot multiple at a time, or what really makes or breaks this ability is the fact that every piece of damage you do heals you back, basically giving you a free and more powerful version of Leeching Seed. Seeker's movement ability is very interesting to me, as it plays very similar to a better version of Strides of Heresy. The only issue is that after a few seconds you are invincible, but the longer you stay in, you start to lose 20% of your health per second. So please don't quote me, because I don't completely understand the math of it all. All I could say is you just lose health really fucking fast. Now what makes up for your health loss is the fact that any enemy you hit while flying gets hurt. Once you exit the ability, you explode, damaging the enemy view around you. Now the damage you deal from this explosion isn't very high, I will say, but this is helpful to fight some enemies like the Soul's Control Unit or the XI Construct, in the events that they decide to fly into the fucking moon. What I do enjoy the most out of Seeker's ability is so mobile that it lets you pretty much fly anywhere you want if you need to get out of a pinch. You can fly away, or if you need to get to somewhere that's difficult for you to reach by mobility standards, you couldn't get there as well. And finally, for what makes Seeker different than the others is her ultimate ability, which is almost really cool, as whenever you press it, you go into a meditation phase where you have to play Dance Dance Revolution in order to heal yourself and anyone around you. Eventually doing this, you'll start to fill this flower and different petals, and on your 7th petal, if you have any friends in the game that are dead, you will revive these friends. Now the only issue I have with Seeker as of right now is I don't completely understand her revive, as the way I see it is, from what I can tell, is you're only able to revive one friend, once again meaning that if you want to use a revive, it's probably smart to wait until your entire team dies, then revive them. But if one person dies, then you only have 1 revive. But if you were to revive that one person and then your buddy dies after them, then you're fucked. So it's just really confusing thing to use, and it is a little busted. I wish it was a once per person instead of once per stage. Seeker, in my opinion, is really fun, as she is very mobile, at the same time being able to keep your team alive while also being able to bounce back very easily by getting shit on health wise. And this is where we start to move on to Chef. Now I will say off the bat, Chef was a character that had to grow on me at first, because I didn't really understand how he works, and then I genuinely just did not like him and how low damage he did. He's very slow, he has no mobility, and his abilities just don't go anywhere. He has no range, so at first I thought he was supposed to be a medium range character, until I eventually realized no, he's most likely supposed to be a melee character. Now for those of you who don't know, Chef is a recurring character originally from Risk Rain 1, and he was a character that in order to lock him, you had to get 3 specific items in the game. Now unfortunately, since I'm an idiot, I was never able to unlock him and really see how he works, due to the fact that apparently you're supposed to just use artifact to command to get those specific 3 items, but I decided I wanted to try to do it without it, so I ended up doing a 300-minute game, which eventually the sun came up and I just stopped at that point because I just couldn't get him and wanted to go to bed. In order to unlock Chef, you have to find 3 specific items: Blood Fusion, Bison Steak, and Cautious Slug, alongside your journey, and eventually once you have all of these 3 items, you have to bring them back to the Reformed Altar, where you will enter them inside this little cave thing with a window where they will cook all together, and you will unlock Chef through the window. Very unfun idea to unlock a character in my opinion. Now when it does come to Chef, after a while of playing with him, I started to finally understand how he is supposed to work, and I will say he's genuinely so much fun once you figure him out the correct way. Chef's main ability will be his cleaver, which took me forever to figure out, but apparently once you throw it, it will go any distance you toss it, and once a clicking you will return it and it will do more more damage on its way back. This will kind of play as his medium attack in order to deal with some flying enemies, but it's not very good to count on. His next ability will be his flamethrower ability. The only issue with this disability is that it covers 0 ground, so in order for it to work, you have to be in the face of the enemy that you want to torch with it. And this is what leads up to his main ability, which is I want to call rowing pin ability, where you have the chance to hold it down to 3 different charges, and once you use it, you'll roll around the map basically running over and damaging enemies you run into. This then is accompanied by his ultimate ability, which is Sear, which has you shooting 7 times 200% of these oil globs, which once hitting enemies they do hit, it will mark with Sear. Now Sear is what basically plays into this entire character, as not only does he have these 4 abilities, but you also have a passive ability that if killing an enemy that is with Sear by cooking them, you will make a recipe which will drop a piece of food that will heal you. This in my eyes is a kind of way to counter the fact that since Chef is slow and you have to get so up close and personal without having a mobility, it gives you a way to out heal your enemies that you are cooking. But what confused me the most about using this character is the fact that all of these abilities on your own are not very effective. But the way more effective to be with Chef is, I think, a very unique and different than a lot of characters I've used in the past. Is that in order to be the most effective, you have to use all of Chef's abilities at the same time. So here's an example of how that's going to work. First, you'll want to see your enemy. Let's say you're fighting an Elder Lemurian. You just want to sear him, and then you'll put on the debuff where now you'll do extra damage from your flame. So what you're going to do is you want to, after searing him, is going to rowing mode. Once you're rowing, activate your flame and you'll just run into him a bunch while burning him at the same time. So this could be in a way used as an AoE effect where you can just roll into groups of enemies while searing and burning them at the same time, so he just becomes a rolling pin of fire. I'll just take out crowds of enemies and do plenty of damage. So if you're planning to use Chef, keep in mind that you're going to have to start comboing your enemies to find yourself being the most effective. And this became honestly very fun, as once I got that aha moment of figuring out how Chef worked, I had so much fun using him, and he is genuinely just so cool and does a lot of damage. But what really does it for me with Chef is not only is he a kind of skill-based person, at a point that if you have to sit back and wait for all your skills, it's kind of good to start wanting to look for stuff like Brainstock and Alien Head, maybe even Bandolier. On the topic of these different items, what Chef does nice to me is he took a lot of items in the game that I once saw were pretty useless and I wouldn't care for too much. Now made me care for items I originally didn't really give a shit about. For example, like I said, Alien Head and Bandolier and Brainstocks are now items that I want to have as Chef, because that just means I get to use his abilities even more. Which is why you could probably just say use Hardlight Afterburner, Fuel Cell, or Backup Mags, but regardless, eventually if you run out of that stuff, you'll still find yourself having to sit back and not take damage as you need to regain your abilities. So being able to just always have your abilities available because of these items make it so much more worth it. Another item I do want to point out of originally though was super useless but now has a new purpose with Chef. This item is Singularity Band, which even if you don't know what Singularity Band is, it allows it so any Renald's band or Kajaro's band you have gets converted on high damage, you create a black hole. Now for most characters this is very useless, but since Chef needs to be up close and personal, especially if groups of enemies, being able to black hole a group of enemies and then running them and then fire them all at the same time just doing massive damage is just something that's so satisfying to me I can't even begin to explain. And for final and most exciting character yet, we have the False Sun, which I'm going to be honest, I thought was so cool that we actually get to play as a boss. So for example, I thought Mithrix was a really cool character, and being able to run around with his hammer would probably be such a cool thing to do. Now originally when I was making the last video for Risk of Rain, I actually wasn't even going to do it about Seekers of Storm. But while I was doing research for Risk of Rain, I accidentally found on Steam the wishlist Seekers of the Storm, and when I went down that giant rabbit hole, at first before any new stuff came out, I didn't even know what the False Sun was or what was happening. I thought what was happening is I thought Providence was going to come back from the first game like he didn't die somehow, and that he was going to get his revenge or something along those lines, but obviously I was very wrong. Providence and Mithrix are both very dead, and now we are moving on to the False Sun. So this character with what he does is obviously as his main attack, it's just a melee with his club, and it's very good, it's very fun to use, and just watch him swing around. Also just everything about the False Sun, the way he looks just looks so fucking cool. His second ability is actually kind of weird how it works. So he shoots out up to 4 different spikes that recharge slowly, and these spikes just do damage as they would, but instead of using them, if you were to keep them, you can keep up to 4 spikes, which equates to like 2.something% of armor and damage, or however it works. You have his moving ability, which is just very basic. It's just a couple of quick dashes, which is very nice because he's a very slow character. But for what I was the most excited about using his character, and it really paid off, was his laser beam. I do wish the laser beam looked a little closer to how he kind of looked like in the trailer, that giant red beam, which would have been really cool to see, but regardless, it's really fun, and it is a sniper. And just like Chef's kind of build up on his moving ability, you can build up a charge, and the longer you build up, I believe it does more damage. I don't know what the duration, if it stays the same regardless, but basically you can sit there and charge up his laser beam. Wherever you look, the laser beam, kind of how Void Thing works, you just snipe things from across the map with it, and it is so good. Now I will say, unfortunately, the False Sun does do very weak damage at the beginning, and I haven't gotten to play him enough to really understand what items work best with him. And obviously he's a melee character, so his being doing a lot of quick damage, so who knows kind of what might work well with him. But hopefully soon I'll get to play more, I'll get to understand. But he is a really cool character, and I can't wait to play with him some more, and I am so happy he is in the game. Now I will say, depending on what difficulty you are doing, I decided to do Monsoon because I got bullied by a comment in the last video, and I'll get back to that eventually. But basically, in order to unlock the False Sun, you have to beat the boss fight. But first you have to go to Aurelianite, fight her, get her Halcyonite seed, and then while fighting the False Sun, if you have the Halcyonite seed in your inventory, upon defeating him with it, you'll purify his soul and unlock him as a character. Now I will say the 2 unlocks for the 2 unlockable characters for this DLC has been really fun and somewhat challenging things. Now of course it's probably a lot less challenging if you just use Artifact of Command, or if you're just on a lower difficulty like Drizzle and you have to unlock him like that. But for me, it was kind of a bitch to unlock the False Sun, and I will explain that later because I kind of challenged myself and I didn't really have to, but other than that, it was a fun time. Alright, so now for items that they added in the game. I believe they added about 16 items according to the wiki, and an equipment, and I couldn't find it, and I don't know if they added it with the 16 items, but there is now a new lunar item, but I'll get to that in a moment. So the first item I'm going to talk about is the knockback fin. Now this item to me isn't very useful. This really just acts as kind of how I treat Stun Grenade, where it's a common item that in that point it's good to just use as scrapped regardless. This item makes it so that you have a 7.5% chance, and then of course difference upon stacking, to knock your enemy back on hit. Not very crazy knockback. Now the next item here is kind of a hit or miss type of item, and I actually don't know until making this video how it worked, but this is Bolstering Lantern, and how it works is according on the item description, it says falling too low health you'll get a damage increase. Now in my opinion this is kind of a difficult item to justify because most of the time you don't want to be at low health, and if you're at little health in this game you're probably going to want to run away and hide and try to heal. Now this is the type of thing that can work on a kind of gameplay style similar to, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's a lot of games out there when it comes to stat buffing where a lot of speedrunners, and please help me if you can think of a game I'm talking about, where there's a time where you can pick an item to increase your damage as you have little health. So there's a lot of times where people will make speedruns where they'll just have like 10% health and just one-shot bosses because it's funny, but other than that I can't really find a use. I guess it wouldn't be a bad idea if you're ever in a situation where you just got the low health and at the blink of time you're doing damage, so you probably just do a spur of damage already. So it's one of those things where it's probably not good to focus on it, but it's probably not bad to have because you never know. Next item is Antler Shield, and is an item I'm still a little confused about, and as one of the bigger Risk of Rain creators talked about, he said that Antler Shield is not a very good item to have. So Antler Shield gives you a 55% chance that upon taking damage you are to reflect 10% of that damage back. So now that I'm understanding it just by saying this, I could kind of see how this is kind of weak, but at the same time if you take a shit ton of damage, you know it's kind of like in a sense a more weaker razor wire. If I were to say anything, it's not so crazy. I personally just like having it because it's fun to wear in your little head, but other than that it doesn't seem very crazy useful. The next item is one of my favorite items, especially if you're using Chef and you're taking out hordes of enemies, and this is Chronic Expansion. Chronic Expansion works is the player's damage is increased by 10% every 5 enemies killed, and this lasts as long as a combat situation is happening. Now I'm a little iffy on how this actually works, but all I know is that if you're in an event where you're killing enemies really fast, especially like Chef where he genuinely can, especially if there's a lot of small enemies, and if you start combining a bunch of AoE items, and you could just keep on adding to your damage and just keep dogpiling groups of enemies, just becoming insane. So these are items I personally like to pick up, but I also could see how these would probably be a little less good on other characters. Now this next item looks really cool, but is kind of confusing, and I feel like it could be a little bit controversial an item, but this is Warped Echo. What Warped Echoes does is it splits the damage that you were taking. So for example, if I got dealt 50% of my health and the damage instead, I will now take 25% of my damage now, and then like 3 seconds later for say takes the other 25% of my damage. So I don't know if it's one of those items that are supposed to be combined with more like healing items or kind of like a one-shot protection. And the more you have of this item, the more you split your damage. So for example, if I take 50% of my health, it'll split, I don't know, maybe like 17%. I don't know off the top of my head math. We sort of understand what I'm kind of saying. Now for another item we have is Noxious Thorn, and this is kind of interesting item as it plays similarly to the antlers, but instead of it just inflicting back retaliatory damage, instead what this does is you have a 25% chance on hit to apply 2 stacks of bleeds on enemies around you. Now I don't know how effective this could be by itself. I haven't really seen or thought about how items work with it, but if the enemies around them already have 2 or more debuffs instead, it will add just 1 to the 2 stacks of those debuffs that are already on those enemies instead. For the next item we have here, what I think is probably one of the best items, probably very broken, and this is Sailstar. How Sailstar works is just a kind of like regenerating scrap. Once you start a stage, the first box you unlock gets doubled. So how this works is every stack of Sailstar, you will get a 5% chance more to get even more items on your first box pool. So to understand this, if you just open a random box, you will get 2 white items or 2 green items or even a mix. So if you have something like a legendary chest on a level, you can absolutely wait to not open up a single chest on that level, save up and open up the legendary chest, and you will get 2 reds or even more if you're lucky with more stacks of this. With this item very good, and it's very nice for people who are trying to do god runs or just get the blessed runs in general. Now one of the things I would like to quickly say about the items is on my last video when I was going through the item logs, I thought there were going to be 6 new items, but instead there was way more than that. But one of the items I read was going to be a Shrine of Chance item, and I knew for a fact, but at first I thought that this was going to be an item where it would give you multiple rewards upon using the Shrine of Chance. Instead, this item is the Chance Doll, and what this item does is instead gives you the chance to get higher rarity items off of your Shrine of Chance. So this basically is just a let's go gambling simulator. Now this next item is very interesting because this looks like an item that Gearbox is trying to aim more towards other characters instead of just being focused on the new 3 characters, and this is Luminous Shot. And what Luminous Shot does is whenever you're doing damage with your secondary item, it will charge your next primary shot to do 150% more damage upon shooting. Now this item isn't very useful on the 3 characters we have now because their primary seems to do lesser damage, although it may be useful on the False Sun, although I highly doubt it. This is an item that could probably be really useful for someone like Multi, where you can use their canister shot to charge this up, and then if you're using something like the railgun, then your next railgun shot will be absolutely powerful, and this can work for anyone else you might think be really good on. So this next item is kind of confusing me, and I still don't really understand how it works, but I'm just going to tell you how, like, what it tells me is this item is prayer beads, and what this does is when you have the item, you charge about 20% of your stats on this item, and you will have these stats on this item until you lose it. So for example, scrapping it or something like upon losing the item, you will eventually get those stats you stored. So if I'm going to assume how this works, this is probably one of those investment things where it's basically just a bonus, you get rid of it, you just get more than what you would have gotten eventually. So this next item is an item that could be really useful, or an item that could probably be the end of use sometimes, but this is Unstable Transmitter, and what this item does is when falling out the low health, you immediately explode doing 350% damage to enemies around you, and then you will be randomly teleported to a random part of the map. Now this is really good if during a fight you take a bunch of damage and you get lucky enough to get teleported away. This will give you the chance, especially if you have something like Medkit, to get an instant heal and probably live to keep siding. So there have been a lot of times where I was mid-attack, got teleported away, I just died in a different place instead. It must have been like if I had bleed or something or fire on you, you just don't get rid of their stats, but who knows. Now this next item is actually very interesting, and this item is Sonorous Whispers. Now before I tell you about this item is basically what 56 Leaf Clover did in the first game, where you had a specific % chance to upon killing elite enemies drop an item. But now that this is a different than the 57 Leaf Clover, if you mix these two, you can get a powerful mix of being able to kill a bunch of enemies and rack up on loot very fast. Very cool item that I have not been yet granted the ability to even see it become useful or even get to the 57 Leaf Clover, but in theory it sounds insane. For the next item, I don't even know if I've picked it up, but I don't think I've ever used it, but this is, while benefiting from 5+ unique stats, you will gain 20% more bonus stats for 5 seconds. I don't really know how to stack it, and it doesn't sound that useful to me, but for all I know, I could be completely wrong. It almost kind of sounds like a temporary buff, kind of like Harpoon, but for everything instead of just speed. Now the next item is going to be our first item, and this is called Electric Boomerang. Now I have also never touched this item. I saw it once and it was in the Hidden Bazaar, but I didn't grab it because I just didn't know what the fuck it was. But this is a 15% chance on hit to fire an electric boomerang about that travels a short distance before returning, dealing 30% 25% damage. So in a sense, this almost sounds like it's the Renaissance disc, but just way weaker. I guess the only way I could see this being really good, other than just doing bonus damage, kind of like shurikens, is probably the fact that it stuns enemy it touches, so it's probably good if you need to slow down a crowd or get away from a sticky situation. Now, Runic Lens, which is another red item, is actually a really cool item as it acts similarly to the lightning ring from Vampire Survivors. And what this does is on hit, you have a 5% chance to summon a meteor on the target, dealing 2000% damage. So basically, to give you a mental picture of how this works, just imagine an enemy that you're shooting at just slowly and everything, and then he just gets fucking obliterated from a lightning strike. It's kind of like a item version of the Royal Capacitor. War Bonds is going to be our final item, minus the equipment I haven't gone to yet, which is also another red item, and this item yields 75 gold plus 25 per stack based on the current difficulty level, and the survival levels at the start of every stage. So basically all this does is just gives you more money at the beginning of the stage. Now this is something that seems to be more effective at the beginning of your run, but at the time you get to later runs, you're going to make money anyways by killing like 4 things. So War Bomb seems to be a little less effective, and it's probably one of those things where you're good to just pick up just cuz, or if you have a red item that you feel like scrapping for a reason, then this might not be a terrible choice. Now the last item is an equipment, and this is Seed of Life. Now unfortunately, I don't think I've ever picked this up, and I don't know what it does as the wiki won't even say. So if you find this, good luck. Tell me actually in the comments if you guys know and what would be very nice. Also, going back on this video, since I have played during the time I wrote this script, what I believe Seed of Life does is allows you to revive yourself if you have it on you, or if one of your friends dies, you could use it to revive them, I believe. For this next section, we will be talking about the new enemies of this game. Now this section is going to be a little bit shorter because honestly there's only 3 new enemies, and other than that, the False Sun of course being the 4th one. But the first one we're going to start out with is the Child. Now the Child is more of a fan service type of enemy, as he is from the first game, and in the trailer was supposed to be a kind of new threat to the Risk of Rain chaos. But unfortunately, as he does look like a cool enemy to fight, these new enemies I'm about to talk about don't really have a big presence and don't really feel like they matter to me whenever I'm playing. Other than the Halcyonite, of course. So starting off with the Child. How the Child works is he will shoot tiny little things at you, and if he gets close to you, hit you, but as you're engaging him, if you hit him for the first time, he'll randomly teleport away. Also, I don't know how it works, but it almost seems like the Child doesn't really aggro you in the first place, so why is he even there if he's just there for fun? And I also hold the same sentiment for the other new small enemy added, which is the Scorchworm. The Scorchworm, in my opinion, seems to be, well, supposed to be a mini version of the Magma Worm, just this time that what they do is they bury themselves underground and they travel around only momentarily before popping up and shooting flaming balls at you. The only issue is when they do burrow, they're invincible and can't be killed. So if you're trying to kill them and they're taking your shots but they just hide anyway, there's really no point to just sit there and try and fight them. They're one tiny enemy and they don't even do enough damage anyways, so really unfortunately, just like the Child, I pretty much just ignore this enemy whenever I see him. I haven't even focused once on this enemy. And that leaves us with the Halcyonite. Now the Halcyonite is more of a mini boss enemy, and I will say that fighting him is pretty fun to me, as even though he is right now kind of a pushover, if you find yourself backed against a corner or if he has the upper hand on you, he will with his spinning attack send you fucking flying into orbit. And that is pretty much most of the interesting thing about him. He does actually have a range attack similar to the Stone Golem. The only difference is instead of just shooting one laser beam that tracks you, he tries to shoot you with a golden beam, but once he decides to shoot, he shoots 3 beams wherever he is aiming, but his beams don't move from where he last aimed. So pretty much if you just bait him to shoot somewhere and then move to the left, he won't even track you down. So it's almost as his beam attack will only get you if you're not paying attention. Other than this, his spin attack and his laser attack, all he does is basically float around and hits you. Some of the times I notice that his AI isn't very smart, so sometimes he'll just track you to a random wall that you might be, say, standing on top of, and then he gets stuck so you can just do a shit ton of damage to him. So I do think he's a really cool enemy to fight, he's just not very threatening or crazy. Now for the boss fight. I will say it is so cool, although for me, when on my first 2 runs, I thought I lasered him and I thought he was a pushover. But eventually I got into the game the next day where he seemed to be clapping me, and I got to him like 3 different times. I couldn't beat him with my friends. Now I don't know what that was all about, but other than that, on a fight wise, he isn't too crazy and he has 3 phases. I'm just gonna break this down slowly by slow. Upon getting to his arena, you get put into a forced cutscene where I'll just have to say, Risk of Rain, you guys are so fire at your guys' boss intros, yet for the last 2 bosses, you guys can't even make a cutscene for them at the end. again. So what's the deal with that? Basically, as you get to this cutscene, for some reason you get struck by lightning, and I don't know why, but then everything zooms into the giant temple of his head, and it slowly looks at you with such a cool entrance, and with the guitar riff, the false sun starts the fight. How the fight basically works is around the arena you have a bunch of pillars, and he'll spawn spikes everywhere. These spikes will explode and do damage to you if you get too close, kind of like landmines, and other than that, they periodically he'll cover the map in random pillars of whatever the blue damaging thing is that Mithril does. Now, he'll pretty much just chase you around and try to hit you if you're close up, and if you're too far, he will dash at you and try to get you that way, and that's only in phase 1. Now, during all 3 phases, you'll find these random yellow pillars of perfection, and upon interacting with them, you'll get healed, plus getting a bunch of temporary shields similar to the Topaz Brooch. Phase 1 is very easy, just as long as you don't let him get close and don't get hit, then you'll be fine. And then phase 2 is where things ramp up, just 100% more. So here, he will also gain a new attack, while the arena will get very obviously smaller, and on top of this, a bunch of ads of just 100 fucking stone golems spawn. There's a point where my only issue with this boss fight is you get to it in time where you're dodging more of the stone golems trying to beam you than you really are trying to fight the boss. Well, at one point this just seems a little bit fucked up, it also does turn into a little bit of a bullet hell where you have to get really good at dodging and hiding. Now, his new ability is what really is an end runner for me, as you'll spend a lot of time trying to break line of sight from his gaze. His gaze is also a laser beam, being that his survivor version uses, but he will just track you down anywhere you are and just beam you constantly for a while, similar to the Stone Titan, just way stronger. Now, after you get past phase 2, you're on to phase 3, and all phase 3 is just the same thing as phase 2, just a shorter arena. And eventually after phase 3, you kill him, and pillars will rise towards the temple of the arena, and you will have 2 options. You can either sacrifice an item, or you can enter a green portal to the right, which will let you continue your run, directly taking you to the next map, which is Hellman's Hatchery. Now, really quickly, I do want to take a pit stop and say, I noticed I didn't actually talk about Hellman's Hatchery back when I was talking about stages, and unfortunately that's because I literally only played the stage once, and I don't really have much to say about it. Now, I will say I do think it's one of the coolest looking stages, and I think the whole traversal thing is really cool, and I like it through what it might seem like it's really annoying to progress, but other than that, I think it's a cool looking stage. I just wish I could play it a little bit more to get a genuine opinion on it, especially since the only time I played it, I already had very high mobility anyways, so the whole point of the stage didn't really apply to me. Now, upon sacrificing an item, this is how you end your run, and what you do is you choose any single item in the game to sacrifice. Upon doing this, you will get the achievement for sacrificing an item, and you unlock the Artifact of Rebirth, which allows you to, every time you start a game, the item you placed in the cauldron last time you'll start with, and I believe this is for any item. So for example, you could take a really busted item like 57 Leaf Clover or Brilliant Behemoth, and you could store it in there so you start with what your very next game, similar to how the fridge works in Black Ops 2 Zombies, where you can store a weapon, then grab it for another run if you want to. Now, in the event that you die or never put another item in it, then you will eventually see yourself just getting a random item instead, and usually just a lower tier random item. I don't know if they'll ever give you reds by chance or not, but other than that, it's more of an artifact I'll put on just for fun, more than anything, but in concept, if you use it correctly, which I haven't, but I really want to, it could be pretty busted. And then you beat the game. No cutscene. Just like Survivors of the Voids, it ends, and honestly, I have a couple disappointments about this boss fight. And a couple of these are, when I was talking about the last video, during the script reading, I said that he had voice lines, and that was mainly just because he was the first character that really had a voice, and this was mainly because of the trailer. And so when I got to the boss fight, and I figured that he doesn't talk to you, he just does the same thing that Mithrix does, I was big bummed out when I got to that point. Another thing is, I was really hoping there would be a cutscene, because this is a grand continuation of the storyline. They put so much effort in, but decided to just play it like it's a mind game and just not say anything about it, not even giving us some type of cutscene. You just sacrifice and that's it. So this brings me to the question of what is now the foreseeable future of Risk or Rain, or if they give us nothing to work off of, especially since just like Survivors of the Void, the Voidling just ends and that's it. So now that the False Sun is purified, what does that mean for Risk or Rain 2? How did that have any lasting impact? It almost feels like Seekers of Storm didn't do much, and I know that in my last video I talked so high and mighty about how I was excited for this to be a grand continuation. That is genuinely because I guess I was naive, so I believe from what I've seen in the first devlog in the past that this would be a grand continuation, but in reality it left me feeling like it was just another DLC. Now, one more thing I talked about the boss fight before I leave is obviously the soundtrack. The soundtrack that plays for the DLC is the trailer song that plays during the reveal trailer. On top of that, this song is called Ami Padme Hum Part 1, which there are 3 parts of them and all of them are fire, but this one during each stage has you listening to a different section of the song. It is so good and it just ramps up with intensity. One more thing I wanted to talk about, I almost forgot, was about the stage. Look at one point the aesthetic of this entire boss fight, even if it is a little lackluster mechanically, it was so beautiful to work around. At one point I stopped mid boss fight and told my roommate, the guy I was playing with, told him, hey, stop, look around, it is crazy beautiful. And that is everything new with Seekers of the Storm, and my thoughts on individually every new item and things I've seen so far. Now, there are some other things I will be talking about, as I still have a good amount of things to discuss about Seekers of the Storm, especially opinions and feeling wise, but this is now where I want to take a pit stop. I want to read through the comments of the last video and I want to talk about them and react. I want to see if I can disagree or agree to things that have been said, so let's do a little pit stop and talk about it. Now, first off, I want to talk about a couple of their comments I got talking about was my pronunciation of Lemurians and Simulacrum. Now, I don't actually know how to say it. Is it Simulacrum? So, I don't know. A lot of you people definitely blaze me for that, but all fun and games. But yes, I guess Lemurians definitely makes sense. Next up, happy birthday to Marceletta. Your birthday by the time I'm writing this script would have been a couple of days ago, but happy birthday. You get to share your birthday with probably one of the most controversial DLCs for this game yet. So please enjoy it. I really hope you did get to enjoy it with the DLC as well. Now, this one was actually more interesting, and we're going to start talking about the game with this one by Timeless Raccoon 7518. He said, I hope that the false son is really a playable character. I hope that he'll have voice lines acknowledging you fighting himself during the boss fight. Yeah, I am glad that he is a playable character, but you're right. That would have been pretty cool, and because he said that, when I did get to play the false son, I even checked to see if he would say anything, but he didn't say anything different, unfortunately. Next up, by Mauricio Ansono, ETAET. I'm probably gonna have to just start simplifying these names, but this person talked about Chef. Chef reminds me people already mod it into the game, exactly as if it was in Risk of Rain 1. Hope they just went like, hey Mr. Mod Maker, can we just copy your perfect work? Here's 2,500 for it. So this comment that I won't really talk about because, like, again, I don't actually know how Chef played in the first game, and now the more I talk about it, I kind of want to go back to the first game and try to unlock Chef. And this time, with the fucking artifact of command, so I'm not being stupid, but whatever. What matters is how he played in Risk of Rain 1. I do really enjoy how he plays in Risk of Rain 2, and I wouldn't ask for it any different. So as of that, I think he's a very cool addition. I think they did him very well. This next comment was from Hyperfrog, and this one was, the only thing they need to do to persuade me to trust him is a mega twist in the False Sun boss fight. And I asked, what type of twist are you thinking? Or what would be cool to you? They said, halfway through the fight, like as an example, a newt drops from the net and starts attacking you. Then, under that, Benny1079 said, that's a fun twist. How about the twist being a phase where the False Sun infects the ground with his hand or something, and then the literal stage will start to fight you? So this gets very interesting actually, because I don't know how a newt dropping from the net would matter or how it changed, but as a plot twist, this would actually be really cool because this would add something for the story and add maybe a new possibility. Even if they didn't want to give a cutscene for the False Sun, it would have been cool if they sprinkled even something in there for us to have an idea of anything. And then the person saying that the infected ground stage starts fighting you, honestly, of how the whole story works of making something that's in an anime come to life, I genuinely don't think that would be a bad idea. That honestly of itself could have been some type of phase and would have been really cool. Now, this is one of those ones I'm happy to be right about, and this is by Ambrosia Polyoke Egg. That's an awesome name, by the way. They said, I do suspect that the False Sun will not be a playable character, that him having files somewhere to his survivors is product of how all enemies in the game function, where their functionality are weaker computer-controlled survivors without complete movesets. And I will say, I am so glad that my speculation was right, and I'm glad that he is a player. By OFXCH, they said, you're saying the False Sun just needs a girlfriend? Absolutely. Now for this next comment by Aubrey Escaped, here you said, not exactly related to the main topic of the video, but the thought just hit me. I wonder what's going to happen if you bring Aurelia Knight and her House Knight seed to the False Sun fight. Will she continue aiding you because you freed her from a prison, or turn on you to help her son? Now that was a crazy coincidence, and at the time I probably didn't respond to that because I honestly didn't even know what to say, but a little weird that she didn't have a fight in it at all. And I'll actually talk about that after this comment section, but very interesting. And you said, as for survivors, False Sun, I wonder if you will play somewhere next to the Paladin model survivor, both having a big sword, a secondary which is based on the lunar shards, and a dash ability. Holy shit, you couldn't have been more right. Go crazy, you deserve that one. Now these next ones were kind of funny because these back to back were like, buddy, the DLC ain't even out yet, and also, I'm going to be real, you should probably wait for the DLC to come out before praising it. And I do think that's a fair thing to say, although me personally, I do really enjoy the DLC, and so I'll take my W while I have it. And this comment I did want to throw in here was by Infected Animal 9830. Well, new update is out now. Think you'd make a follow-up? And I want you to know, you are pretty much the reason why I even did make a follow-up. Because I didn't think I was going to, but genuinely it's probably a good idea, especially now that people like you are coming to my video after the fact. It's there, so thank you for watching, and thank you for wondering, as yes, because of your question, I did want to. This is also fun to me, as I have a couple of comments, one by Junction1750 and Raven1963, both saying, didn't age well, or really, this really did not age well. So this is one of those things that I am kind of interested on, though as a lot of people are probably bummed out or don't like this DLC. For me, my hype did age well, personally, as once I played it, I enjoyed almost every second of it. Although there are some good amount of disappointments from what I've seen, and from what I've experienced, I've had a lot of fun, and I'm still having fun while writing this. It just makes me want to get on and play it even more, and personally, I think I was warranted with my excitement. Now, I know a lot of people are still upset about the state of the game, and want to agree with you guys with the fact where I am a little focused on my continuation part of this kind of conversation, because yes, it was not a good continuation. It was more like putting a top hat on a person. Instead, we didn't really put anything past it. We just got more content without any path or lore or story going anywhere. So I will take my win and my loss there. Now for my next comment, and this one was kind of like one of my lower comments on the video, but this comment was by Potato Thingy 9055, and this was a big time Risk of Rain fan that was very upset by the fact that a larger corporation has taken one of the games they love and about to destroy it. And I 100% understand and agree, because I am both a huge Fallout and a huge Halo fan, and I unfortunately got to see both of those games get ran into the ground by basically shitty corporations that just want money. And now, while I think Seekers of Storm isn't really that bad of a DLC, I do want to talk about the contrast between Seekers of Storm and Survivors of the Void. Whereas originally while writing the script, I was convinced that Seekers of the Storm was way better than Survivors of the Void. But in my all honest opinion, I think they're both better than each other, but just in different ways. Survivors of the Void lost points with me because of stage design, as it only added one Void stage. I totally forgot that Survivors of the Void added Acid Pools, Siphon Forest, and Aphelion Sanctuary. Now, although these fresh stages were nice to the base game, I enjoyed how the Path of the Colossus turned out to be way more than the Survivors of the Void. While in order to get to the Void Wing, you have to wait around to round 10, or you have to rather travel to Void Fields, which were already in the game before the DLC, just to spit you out into the Void Locust, which I think is such an incredibly mid startup to the planetarium. My only complaint is for stages like Aphelion Sanctuary, I think are annoying. While the Survivors of the Void stages look really cool, both Aphelion Sanctuary annoys me, as low mobility makes the map a bitch to traverse, and that since Sulfur Pools belongs to the Blind Pest, the most annoying enemy in the game in my opinion, I don't even enjoy playing that stage. I like how the Colossus levels, although Treeborn Colony is a platform hell, I enjoy the consistency in stage design and the journey itself alongside its music. Now I will say, Survivors of the Void soundtrack is peak, so good, won't ever complain about that. Now when it comes to the boss fight, I think that Void Wing was just a bit cooler than the False Sun. While both being equally boring to fight, at least the saxophone solo to Void parkour in Survivors of the Void is a good transition for the fight. When it comes to items of the DLC, Survivors of the Void absolutely claps Seekers of the Storm, no conversation. Now one point that I do want to admit that I am wrong when it came to my conversation with the Potato is in this conversation I mentioned that I was looking for something new, unique, and fresh, and that's how I felt about the False Sun as a character plot-wise of his creation. I do think he's a very unique, as Potato otherwise says. It's really just a blender of three characters, which yeah, I guess that's not unique, but in my opinion that's unique to what we have seen so far in this game, and that's what I want to focus on so far. Now where I will say I'm wrong though is when it came to the Mithrix boss fight. You mentioned that the Mithrix boss fight was very cool and mechanically different compared to the first boss fight. It was cool. Now me personally, I didn't think that Mithrix boss fight was very interesting, as a lot of times I felt like it's very easy to just soft lock Mithrix and hide on something, as the only thing he does is dodge you with his hammer, and you could just dodge him and not get hit, and it almost feels like the Mithrix boss fight was a waste of your time when it came to fighting the Lunar Chimera, which I think is just kind of lame. But when it did come to the False Sun fight, I saw how kind of lackluster the fight was itself mechanically wise, and I will say I think you take the cake on this one, and it's a little unfortunate, and I just think it did age a little poorly that the False Sun fight was just so mechanically lame compared to Mithrix, and I was so believing that the False Sun was going to do shit where he's going to lead the stage and electrocute the stage for one of the stages, or he'll float up in the sky and you have to run away while he laser beams you, while lightning rocks strike behind him and shit. I was coming up with in my head, but when we really got there, it just wasn't any of that, although it was really cool looking. looking stage and the music was really good. He looks like a cool boss, it's just mechanically the boss fight wasn't insane. And so I want to say you are right for this one. You take the cake. Thank you for your comment though, and you did mention you subscribed, but I will say one more thing at the both of your comments. This is the guy I was saying that was bullying me. So for your first comment at the very bottom, you said, I had zero idea what you're talking about, please play Drizzle and stop talking. And then after that, they said, you are a casual though, post Monsoon wins or get the fuck out, noob. So I responded with that, saying, also, I do play Monsoon as I enjoy unlocking the skins. This is a video about Seekers of the Storm, not my ability to play a video game on its harder sitting. If I played every single match on Monsoon just to prove I'm good at the game where it won't be fun to me, as the only thing Monsoon changes is just how much more you have to run around the map. Risk of Rain eventually becomes a glorified match of Black Ops Zombies. Although I still love the game for what it is, and while I stand on the point that Risk of Rain does turn into a match of Black Ops Zombies, I will say this was effective because now for all the footage I use this video, I made sure to play Monsoon. Not only did I want to challenge myself, but I also folded under your peer pressure, so that is another W for you. You won on that course of it, but even then, on Monsoon, I really just did prove myself, and yes, so this is where I'm going to segue into the next section. So with still some of the sentiment of playing Monsoon on from the last comment, I'll start talking about me kind of playing the game and some more personalized thought and some little things I nitpicked while I was playing it. So of course, like I already mentioned, playing Chef was terrible at first, and I didn't really like him, but eventually I learned how to actually use him and became one of my more favorite characters out of all the other characters. Now, matter of fact, I do really enjoy all of the new characters. While I do think the challenge of unlocking the False Sun as a character is a pretty fun challenge, here's what I did in order to prove you wrong. I am not a casual potato thingy 9055. I decided was to challenge myself in playing where I was going to use Chef on Monsoon difficulty, and at the time I didn't know how Chef works, so this was going to be a bitch for me. And I also decided that I was going to unlock the False Sun while using Chef on this Monsoon difficulty, so this and all was a challenge for me. Now I will say I kept continuously gaming further and further, and the more challenge part I found wasn't the difficulty and wasn't playing the game. The challenge was getting lucky enough and also crying while losing lunar coins as I kept spending money to get to the hidden bazaar in order to try and dream of the gold coast. That was the hardest part of this whole challenge, was getting to the gold coast, because that shit did not spawn for me. So eventually the only way it worked was after dying over and over was I got a god run, whereas with Chef not only did I have a bunch of stuff already, but I got spare drone parts pretty early into run as one of the times I went to the hidden bazaar. Now I will say this is on you, the difficulty is Monsoon and you said nothing about spare drone parts. So you think this is weak, then you're going to have to kiss me on my lips, because I did the shit fair and square, and all I did was just build a drone army with spare drone parts. And then I kind of just ran around, kept looking for gold coast, and kept looking for the new altar, as my drone just pretty much wiped the floor of the game. So it genuinely did become a part where I wasn't even playing anymore, but it was funny because all my drones got wiped during the False Sun. So at one point I did eventually actually have to man up and do the boss fight myself, but eventually won. Now, you may be wondering, oh, so that means you got the elite skin for Chef, and while I will say is no, because I am stupid and decided instead of sacrificing an item while I had the chance, I decided to just fucking go back to the hatchery because I didn't know where that green portal took you. And then I decided that I wanted to go fight for the Voidling for some reason, and then I got obliterated, and then I realized I was more sad because I didn't get my 10 lunar coins back after I spent a bunch. But there you go, this is my visual proof. I am not a casual, I am not a noob. But besides my gameplay, I will say, especially Seeker, that I do enjoy her whole revive mechanic. Her character honestly is just pure fun, and I think all three of the characters are just sick. That's something I'm kind of missing from other characters, where it's a lot like the other characters are mechanically good, but they're not just pure fun, where I personally think Loader or Railgunner are fun because Railgunner is just phase clan simulator. Loader is fun because you just fly around and grapple hook, but I do think there are a lot of more lame characters such as Commando or Captain, or Engineer, where after a while of playing their character, their gameplay loop just doesn't get very much interesting, whereas Commando, you're just holding the trigger and running around, and I know that's pretty much the game anyways, but at least with the other characters, you're putting brain power into everything, or you are having different abilities, but it is what it is. Now, one of the things that I saw someone mention, because I have been paying a lot of attention to the Reddit for Risk Rain 2, something that someone mentioned was a Seekers of the Storm bingo card. It had a bunch of different things to check off when the game eventually came out. One of the things that caught my eye was a Gold Coast remake, and this was something I was actually kind of bummed out, that when I eventually got there, there, which I should have figured they wouldn't touch it, was that the Gold Coast is just the same. There's nothing different. The whole point, and they even said in the story, was that Aurelia Knight was free from the Gold Coast to just roam. So why didn't they rather make a completely new stage that you had to go to fight Aurelia Knight? Or even if you're going to keep it to the Gold Coast, why don't you just make it look somewhat different, or just change it in general? And that was a big bummer, that they didn't really do anything for Aurelia Knight. And I also wish that they tried to at least maybe change the boss fight for Mithrix, especially since if you're going to still have the Mithrix boss fight, why not have it maybe be a different version of it? I know it may seem like I'm asking for a lot, but honestly, for something that's supposed to continue the story of Risk of Rain, but putting the rest of it almost behind, a more complete overhaul of the game from the get-go would have been nice. Something to bring actual meaning behind a whole new DLC. For me, much as I like playing Secrets of Storm and traveling to Colossus alongside soundtrack, I do wish Gearbox spent a little bit more time working on the DLC. Now, what I will say is I don't think this DLC is 100% Gearbox's fault. I think this is probably similar to what happened with Fallout New Vegas, where the devs were forced to rush the game, creating a lot of cut content. Personally, I wish that 1, the false sun had voice lines, and 2, the boss fight was more than just an arena slowly getting smaller, and the boss chasing you around swinging a club. I think the gaze that the false sun does is broken and way too powerful, and then I wish they actually put in a cutscene for us to watch after defeating him, or if anything, give us some type of lead on what might be the future of the false sun, or Risk of Rain itself. Now, another complaint I want to talk about is the items, which Gearbox, you guys absolutely shit the bed on the items. You kind of proved to the community that you guys don't really understand how the game is really played, as most of the items you guys came up with go straight to the scrapper for me. Now, I do think you guys added some really cool items, such as Runic Lens as a red item, and other items like Sailstar, Chronic Expansion, and Chancellor. I think you guys wasted a lot of time with the items. Now, I will say, although the new items make the overall items of this pool game a lot shittier, I will say the one upside is that whenever you're in the void fields, this makes it easier for enemies to get useless items, which is nice because I'm tired of enemies getting 20 crowbars every fucking time. Now, I don't think that Gearbox is totally lost when it comes to completely understand what is going on with Risk of Rain. I think they nailed the level design and the gameplay loop of it. Now, of course, I'm not such a big fan of new elites they added, such as the Twisted and the Gilded enemies. Now, I do think the Gilded enemies are cool, they're just so tanky for no reason, and upon that, they steal your money if you're damaging them, so you're essentially forced to just try and kill them. So annoying. I think that Gearbox did genuinely care about Risk of Rain, and I hope that they genuinely learn from this DLC. I hope that if something new comes out from Gearbox, that they take the time to actually make something special, instead of kind of just throwing out new content in order to get money. I do hope that Gearbox makes something worth our while on the next option, with a boss fight who actually matters, and items that people are genuinely excited to pick up. And while I do enjoy Secrets of Storm and have fun playing it, I won't pretend that there has been a lot of missed opportunities here, and that a lot of the fan base definitely feels as if they have been robbed of what their game originally stood for. And although I am optimistic about the future of Risk of Rain 2, I at least am hoping that Gearbox doesn't just end up abandoning the game. And if they do, who do they pawn it off to? If anyone at all. And that is what really matters the most to me of all. And with this being said, this is all I have to say about Secrets of Storm as of now. If you guys have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and it means the most that you have stayed tuned this far. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and also leave a comment, rather telling me if this video is fire, or ass, or too long and I need to stop making videos past an hour of editing. Also, if you guys have any questions or corrections to anything I have said so far, let me know. Thank you all, and have a good day.